Hello everyone. It's been a long time since I made a recording, but I saw this game today between Mamedyarov with the white pieces and Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces, and I wanted to give my 2 cents. This is from round 9 of the Biel tournament, and Mamedyarov is leading, uh, 2 points with 1 round to go, and he played a beautiful, simple game today. Now, I just want to disclose that I am going over this game with no engine. I'm not going to get deep into theoretical analysis, but just discuss general principles. Okay, so enjoy. Mamedyarov started off with d4 as he usually does. Knight of 6 from Carlsen. c4, g6. Now, what are we going to have? King's Indian, Grunfeld. g3, bishop g7. So we can have some flexibility here. Bishop g2 castle, knight c3. So looks like some type of King's Indian has occurred. Knight of 3, c5. And now this gives black, or gives white, the opportunity to enter into some type of Benoni variations. Now, 40, 50 years ago, if not longer, the modern, well, the move that was played most back then, in the Bronstein, Tau, Soviet era glory days, was d5 going into this positional setup, which is related. And there's nothing wrong with playing like this today. It's just less flexible and more committal on White's behalf. As a matter of fact, Anatoly Karpov played this against Sachs. Can't remember when. Again, I'm just going off the top of my head, but I remember he won a beautiful game at the d5, and the dynamic player Sachs had played this move e5 here, and then Anatoly castled, if I remember correctly, and then I remember he wound up breaking open the game on the queen side in brilliant fashion. So that's another way to play if you really like like that structure and want to commit early to a structure like that. Nowadays, and probably for the last 30 years at least, right? Definitely since the 70s and 80s, castle has been the modern option, as it's more flexible. You figure you're going to castle anyway. Let's see what's what's going on. And of course, that gives the opponent the option to, dictate what type of opening is going to be played. Right? So for instance, you have to be prepared to deal with this position. So it depends on your style and taste. You could commit early, play d5, and not have to worry about transposition, into, Sicilians and such, and Marazzi bind type positions, etc. And Karpov was definitely that type of player where he had his repertoire and he kept things really simple. But this is a modern approach, is just the castle. Knight c6, we see Magnus putting more pressure on d4. So now he could have took, but instead he puts more pressure, and perhaps he wants to provoke this move d5. However, Mamedyarov keeps it solid, plays e3, and this can frustrate some players' plans if they wanted to play a move like c takes d4 here, because now black will not have access to the dark squares, because here these squares will still be covered by this pawn. But if you really wanted to, wanted the access to these dark squares, instead of playing knight c6, you could have just played that straight away. So again, a little cat and mouse being played at the top levels of chess here. So e3, and now Carlsen uses the tempo to play the move d5 himself. Now, again, I'm not using the engine, but I believe this move is the beginning or start of the troubles that black faces in this game, because from this point on, Mamedyarov gets a nice initiative. C takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and already we have an opposition situation. on the board, whereby the queen on d5 is in direct opposition to the bishop on g2, and therefore Magnus is going to have to utilize some time to bring that queen to safety. And immediately, the dynamic player Mamedyarov, who reminds me of Alexander Loikin, exploits this situation immediately. Now, normally, black would not be able to get away with this because, you know, white would just lose a pawn on e5. But however, you have this situation, the queen has to be moved to safety. Queen to d6, and just in the style of Alexander Loikin, he keeps the pieces on the board. He plays knight c4. Perhaps more positional player, maybe someone like Fabiano Caruana or you know, a Karpov in his heyday would have just captured here, perhaps, and you know, put all his eggs in this basket and try to somehow focus on the C file here, and one day hope to generate enough pressure here and combine with the pressure on this diagonal and penetrate the black position and win that way. There's nothing wrong with that plan. However, Mamedyarov is a dynamic player. He plays in that style of Aloykin, Kasparov, Topalov, etc. Keeps the pieces on the board, and he wants more out of the position than minute positional advantage. So Queen C7 is played, and now D5. So now D5 is played, and unlike in the Benoni, now D5 is actually played with tempi here. You know, as you know, normally, just real quick, D4, right? Let's say normally when you play the Benoni, you're not attacking anything. It's just D5 and, you know, whatever. There's no time gain. You're getting space. Okay, so that's a different theoretical discussion altogether. But here, if the Queen C7, D5, there's an actual threat on board. Magnus responds with D8, creating his own opposition, and Mamedyarov deals with this in a real simplistic fashion. Bishop D2, now the threat is back on. Remember, this bishop is here, protecting. So the knight has to move. Now, knight e5 is possible. It's not as dynamic, but it seems after a simple move like knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, bishop c3, that these bishops will be exchanged off, which will favor white. And it seems also that black has little prospects in the position, and that you know, white, you know, can just maintain a comfortable edge throughout the rest of the game in a simplistic looking position. Magnus approaches more dynamic, and he agrees to these double pawns, and he's also willing to open up the C file, which again will bring his queen under fire, which seems to be a big theme in this game. However, let me discuss with you a deeper plan. Now, again, I don't want to get into a big theoretical discussion, but more or less just discuss some principles here. Now, in the Catalan opening and also in similar positions, sometimes when you have this bishop on G2, it's very powerful, and you must understand what white is trying to do in many of these types of positions. Usually, this pressure exerted by this bishop will serve to retard black's development on the queen side, often resulting in double pawns, misplaced pieces, what have you. So throughout the years, of course, many great chess minds have labored to figure out, well, how do we deal with these bishops? You know, the Catalan bishop, you know, or the King's Indian bishop, if you will? How do we deal with this powerful piece? Well, there's several methods. One is to just simply trade it off. Now, that's easier said than done. If we could wave a magic wand, black would love to just trade these two pieces off. So, in some lines, you will see that attempt, even early in the opening, you will see moves like bishop d7 and bishop c6 played. And that's why sometimes you'll see the knight held back. You'll even see some lines where knight c6 is played early, and black even allows themselves to have double pawns on the c file just so white will get rid of that bishop. So that's one strategy, to trade it off. Other strategy is to blockade the bishop. Sometimes you can create a pawn structure, whether it's pawn black, black pawn at e4, at 5, say a la Dutch defense, right? Where you blocking the bishop off, and then white will fight that structure by playing f3 and try to undermine and open it up, etc. All right. So these are, but understanding the major plans, right, will help you understand the moves that are being made. So you have, okay, 1, I'm trying to trade off. 2, I'm trying to blockade the bishop. 3 is what happens in this game is what I like to call a scorched earth policy. And basically what that is you're just simply clearing the diagonal. So you say, hey, I'm not trading the bishop, so I can't block it. I'm just going to simply clear out the diagonal. That way the bishop is there exerting influence, but there's no targets there. That's the third option. When you can't do the other two options, and it's always based on the position. When you can't do the other two options, you clear out the diagonal. So this is what Magnus is doing right here. The second part of that plan is he's creating this 3-2 majority here. By allowing d5, white has a 2-1 pawn majority in the center. Eventually, all things being equal, he'll be able to create a pass pawn right in the center of the board. Now, in exchange for that, black has a 3-2 majority on the queen side. So his two plans here is to clear out this diagonal, so that way he can develop properly, and hopefully use this 3-2 majority to create a pass pawn on the queen side, in conjunction, of course, with his powerful bishop. So let's see how things worked out. So bishop takes b4, c takes b4. The double pawns is not a big deal here, because this pawn is very powerful, and eventually white will have to get rid of that by trading it off somehow, right? So don't say, oh, he has double pawns now. The big thing that black has to worry about is now the c file is open, and now the queen comes under scrutiny again. Rook c1, you see? So he still has to worry about, his queen safety. So a5 is played, not just to protect this pawn. That has nothing to do with it. Remember the scorched earth policy. This bishop is very powerful on g2. How to get these pieces involved? One of the common things, again, just rook a6, and then followed by b6 or b5. This clears the diagonal, and then sometimes even this bishop will go to b7. But usually, if you're playing the scorched earth policy, you just simply clear the diagonal. Let's look. So a3 is played. B takes a3, a4, queen d3, bishop f5, and that's just hit with bishop d7. I'm sorry, hit with e4. Bishop goes back to d7. And now we see the knight is threatening to go here. And now rook a6, protecting this weakened square. e5. And another principle that I want to bring up is about the mobile pawn center. Mobile pawn center is extremely dangerous, especially in the middle game, because not only can the person with the mobile pawn center create pass pawns, can also orchestrate an attack on the king, because by its very nature, the mobile pawn center by its very nature serves to take away squares from the opponent and the center. And if you drive your opponent's pieces from the center, they become weaker, because we know when we first start learning chess that the strongest place for the pieces to exert their effectiveness is in the center of the board. Therefore, if you drive them away, they become uh, weaker on the edges of the board. So a mobile pawn center is extremely dangerous, and especially in the middle game when there's a lot of pieces, because your king, as the pieces are driven away, they're driven away also from the protection of the king. King comes under attack, and um, the rest is history. Now, as the game goes on, the majority on the queen side can become effective also, and just as dangerous because of the distance that those pawns have from the king. All right, because you figure if, like, look at this position, you see white's king on g1. If black is able to create a pass pawn, let's say this pawn is gone. Look how, and it's the end game, right? Take away all the heavy pieces. Look how far white's king has to go to stop that pawn on a4. Conversely, if it's the end game again, let's take away all the heavy pieces and say this pawn is passed. Black doesn't have as far to go to get to this pawn. All right. However, in the middle game, though, the central pawn majority is definitely more dangerous. B5 from Carlsen, so he completes his mission. Scorched earth policy. Notice there's nothing on that diagonal. And he's pushed his majority. D6, again exploiting the poor queen here. It seems to be a major theme in this game. Queen B8. It's possible to take here. I don't like this position for black at all. The knight comes to a very, very powerful square on D6, whereby this can be attacked. You know, say like queen coming there, bishop here, bishop here, etc. Again, the pieces kind of awkwardly placed here in tempo on the queen. Carlsen decides just to simply move and sacrifice a pawn, and with the idea that he'll get it back. So D takes E7, Rook E8, and now again Mamedyarov, instead of just moving the knight passively, he develops his piece. Rook takes E7. So Carlsen gets his pawn back. Again, still not moving the piece, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is definitely a player to follow in Mamedyarov if you want to learn how to utilize the initiative. Notice it just keeps that knight there. Queen F8. And now knight E3 is played. And here's an interesting scenario here. You can see there's two pieces attacking this pawn. However, due to the weakness of this bishop on D7, the pawn cannot be captured. So, for example, the most obvious move, rook takes E5, will just simply be met by queen takes F8 check, and then the bishop will be captured. If bishop takes E5, then again the obvious move, rook takes D7. Rook takes D7. And queen takes E5. The easy move to make here. So Carlsen opts for bishop E6, establishing a blockade. So if you can't capture the pawn, you can blockade the pawn. Now the problem is this pawn is just left unprotected here. So what to do? Okay. If he did a move like, for example, let's say bishop E8, for example. A simple approach in that case seems to be just a move like F4, just blocking everything, and then coming through, say with the move like rook to E8. Again, forgive me if I did miss anything. I'm not using the engine, but just doing some casual analysis here. But Like move like rook d8, of course, hopping in with the knight afterward seems like a good move. So Magnus again not going passive, sacrifices a pawn and hopes of getting some return on his investment. So rook a7. Here comes the knight, and this forces another small concession. And I always remember the quote of Aaron Nimzovich. He says that the master must be content with the accumulation of small advantages, and the bishop pair is a small advantage. Notice how Carlsen has the bishop pair after this move. It's just too much to allow this knight to land here. So this small, plus in Black's position, right? With everything that might be going wrong, that small plus of having the bishop pair, he has to relinquish even that. And now Black is just down a pawn, and all he can hope for is to rely on these opposite colored bishops for a draw, and perhaps he can go into a drawn rook and pawn ending. So he definitely has his back against the wall, but it's not over yet. So rook e b7. And now for white now has to consolidate the position. Right? That doesn't mean go passive, but consolidate the position. In other words, he has his advantage. So he cannot lose that advantage, right, for anything. Black, of course, wants to make the position as murky and as dynamic as possible to make up for pawn disadvantage, excuse me. So a good move. Instead of just moving passively out the way, for example, I'll make a real passive move like queen f1. He makes this defensive move, but with a threat, and that's what I remember from Lasker. Lasker used to say, if you have to make a defensive move, if you have to retreat or something, try to retreat, but with the threat. And as you can see, after queen d3, right, he gets out of harm's way, but he has this threat of just winning the queen here. Magnus has to go passive. h4. Not only is this an aggressive move, an attacking move, it also fits in with White's plan to move the king to safety and then advance the move f4, which also serves to help kill this bishop even more and support this pawn. Let's keep going. So the attack on the pawn, queen d4. Again, protecting and attacking at the same time. So this pawn is fortified, but he attacks his rook. Magnus must react, and now Magnus protects the rook and attacks here. f4, just like I was saying, and this bishop is dead right now. Meanwhile, White's bishop lives. Notice also how all of Magnus' pawns are on white squares. Right? This is good for the attacking bishop, for the attacking player. For Magnus to have an effective bishop, he must get his bishop free and outside of this pawn chain somehow. Then he has all of these dark square pawns to attack. However, whose bishop has more potential right now? It's White's bishop. Okay, it's gonna take a lot of time before Magnus can do anything to get his bishop to the same level as White. And now that I've explained that to you, you understand the move. Okay, so now you have this double attack here, but of course it's not real because this this rook is still would be on prees. However, the bishop is moved to f8 because it's obvious that the bishop needs scope. King h2. Again, consolidation. He's up a pawn, so now he's making sure all his ducks are in order and his position is totally rock solid before he continues to make progress. Okay, the struggle has the scramble has been completed. So now he's up a pawn. It's time to consolidate here. So rook a b7. All right, so rook a b7, and now there's a threat here. And again, all black's chances are in playing dynamically, and this is what you have to do. You're down, statically, you're down a pawn. So if you just play passively and exchange pieces off and stuff like that, you're going to lose. So Magnus doubles the rooks up. He wants to come down to the second rank. Of course, he wants to try to equalize material. Believe me, if he could eliminate this pawn, then he'd be in a great position. So queen takes a4. Queen takes a3. This allows a favorable endgame situation. So both a pawns are eliminated, and the queens are eliminated. This favors Mamedyarov again, who is still up a pawn. However, Magnus is relying on opposite color bishops and these rooks, and everything's on the same side. So hey, it's a good practical bet here. And we're just gonna continue on here. G takes h5. This is a common. H5. This is a common theme in these type of endings. Breaking up the pawns. Right. This is solid structure. Breaks up the pawns because there's no way that white is going to be able. Black is going to be able to hold on to that. And what it does is it creates the mobility. Because what's going to happen now? Remember, this pawn was guarding this square and this square. So now that this pawn has been deflected, this allows the creation of the passed pawn, right? Because now you have a 2-to-1 here. And that's the theme, right? Creation of a passed pawn. Here, you don't get the passed pawn, because black will have these squares covered. So by doing that, he's able to create this situation. The Magnus takes, and now f5, f6, and this gives white exactly what he's looking for. So he puts the pawn on a dark square, and after e6. So you might be saying, hey, why did he do that? Well, white was going to get a pass pawn anyway, and what black is hoping for is by placing his pawn on a dark square. First of all, that pawn won't be attacked anymore, and with the bishop on e7, he's hoping that he can utilize the power of the dark square bishops, or opposite color bishops rather, to create a sustained blockade, and there will be no progress that can be made in the position. Black is not even concerned about this pawn too much on h5. He's just more concerned right now about creating a blockade. Sorry about that. Rook to b3. Rook d7. Again, notice how Mamedyarov does not play passively, even in the end. Right? Of course, Carlsen wants to double these rooks here and just smash through right here. Doesn't play passively. He stays on the attack. Mamedyarov does, and gives Magnus a question. What are you going to do? You're going to play this and just give up the bishop? Okay, what can he do? Beautiful move. Okay, one. Goes to the 8th rank. Of course, Nemzovich would be proud, as this is where the rooks belong, on the 7th and 8th rank of your opponent. King to h6. Simple attacking rook e8. attacking chess all the way. Look at that. He just is relentless. Of course, there will be no draw here. The bishop goes to e4. Rook 3 to c4, attacking the bishop. Bishop d5. Attacking the rook. Rook 4 to c5. Bishop back to e4. Of course, Magnus would love repetition here, but that's not going to happen. This forces the exchange of rooks. And of course, Mamedyarov has to check to make sure. He already seen the continuation, but he repeated moves, making sure that this opposite color bishop ending is it's not going to be a draw here. Rook a5, bishop c6, and he's setting up the coup de grace here. Now, notice he didn't just go into this right here. Okay, this might be more difficult to convert. Right, you got pressure here, and who knows if it is still a win here at this point. How do you protect that if you're white? Play this. Right, starts getting a little more murkier. Keeps the pieces on. So bishop c6, bishop a3, as the bishop was threatened here. We see this threat right here, and now it's a double threat and a double attack, which is very difficult to deal with, especially in these type of positions where your opponent has a lot of strain on you in the position. The threat here simply takes and to promote the pawn at the same time. Rook e5, and now just simply the king h4, and not rushing at the end. Of course, if rook takes f5, then this move would force black to give up the bishop here. Now after king h4, black is put in a super delicate position here, as king h4 prevents any entry into this square right here by the black king. It just squeezes Magnus here. So king h4, and now there's the simple threat of rook takes f6, winning a second pawn, and there's really nothing black can do about it. Again, if he takes here, then this pawn will advance, and then the bishop will have to sacrifice itself. So Magnus plays the bishop to c1, and of course check right here, and Mamedyarov simply advances the pawn, and there's no piece here to intercept anymore, and there's nothing to stop the pawn from going all the way to e8. And here Carlsen resigned at move 57. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.